The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being with us today. You have to excuse a little bit of background noise here, and it won't last for much longer. My gardener's just getting a bit close to the building here. Okay. Hey, what a terrific day's trading we had today. Boy, it was marvellous. We'll look at that later. And let's see who's here. How's the sound, folks? Can you all hear me all right? Just somebody type into the question box. Oh, good. John from Coffs Harbour. I bet it's a lovely day down there, mate. A grand day up here. Really, really great. And we're mighty relieved, aren't we, after the after the weekend. Hello, Adrian. How are you, mate? He's down in Adelaide. We're mighty relieved after the weekend, I can tell you. But that was really some nail-biting stuff. So, yes, welcome, everyone. Albert Z's with us. Albert, tutorial guy, good to have you with us. Carol, we've got a new lady here. Carol, welcome. We're always particularly excited about having ladies join us. We don't have many of them, and we'd like to have more. Jim, John from Coffs, the Murph is here, and Milton, Peter, more Peters, and Sue, our other lady from up at Cairns. We actually have a few. We have more than two or three, but anyway, it's a pleasure to have them. Sue's a lady who lives up in Cairns in far north Queensland, and we've got to pay great credit to the North Queenslanders who saved us from the apocalypse on the weekend. The apocalypse, of course, being Australia's triennial federal election, where the baddies were routed, and so the rest of us still survive. I'm going to talk to you a lot today about politics, and the particular issue I'm going to talk to you about is Australian politics, which will interest very few of you. Average Australian's not interested in politics at all, and I guess for those of you whose home is not here, it's even less interesting. But Australian elections offer a particularly interesting snapshot for a couple of reasons. The main one is that elections in Australia, voting is compulsory. You're on the roll, you can't get off the roll, you can't do anything much in this country without being on a roll for something, but you're on a roll and you have to vote, and if you don't vote you get fined. The other great Australian innovation is the secret ballot, which was invented in Australia. For that reason it's often called the Australian ballot, and how that works is that when you go to your polling station, there's a little booth that you go into and you complete your vote, excuse me, in secrecy. And this is what's led to what's universally called the shy Tory syndrome. It's a British expression. Their Conservative Party is called the Tories. And what it refers to is the fact that people who are going to vote Conservative are very reluctant to say so publicly. And it's the fact that the Conservative vote is always a few percentage points better than the pollsters give it credit for. And there are all sorts of reasons for that. The main one is that the left-wingers, the Liberals, we're going to have some trouble with that word today, but we'll just see what's happening here. Make sure you've got the right, yeah, you got the right page, that's good. The problem is we're going to have a lot of trouble with the word liberal today. But because of those two peculiarities to the Australian voting system, you get everyone voting. They have to vote, and they can vote. They vote in secret. It's a secret ballot. That means that we get a terrific snapshot of people's emotions, and politics is basically people's emotions in one form or another. And so much of trading is about psychology, about the emotions of the players and the emotions of the populace. And these are really vital issues. So I want to talk to you about that. I'm a I'm a bit of a political nut. I really enjoy politics, particularly if there's a bit of aggro and nastiness about it, which we had in this election, and in the States you have it pretty much all the time. And I stayed up all night while counting was going on Saturday evening. It's really been an amazing event. But we're going to learn things about psychology and about market forces when we do that. So let's move on as we go. The Messiah from the Shire. This was a real big upset. This was Trump and Brexit wrapped into one. The pollsters didn't predict it. We have two main political parties. We have the Australian Labor Party, which is the equivalent of your Democrats. It is, as its name suggests, supposedly the party of the worker. The working man's party is traditionally what the Australian Labor Party was about. The other party, the opposition party, which is presently in power, is called the Liberal National Party Coalition. And there's nothing liberal about it, so you'll be confused with the nomenclature. But the Australian Liberal Party is really the Conservative Party in Australian politics. So the Liberal Party of Australia is equivalent in many ways to your Republican Party in the States, or the Tories in the UK. We then have the usual spattering of smaller parties. We've got a couple of small right-wing parties that gather about 6% of the vote, and preference that we have a preferential voting system. If your first preference vote is not enough to get that person a seat in the Parliament, equivalent to your Congress, then the second preference is counted, and then the third preference, and it waterfalls down. It's called preferential voting. It's quite complex. But it does mean that whatever your vote is, it has some weight. We also have some fairly rabid left-wing parties. We have the Greens, which started life as a bunch of very well-meaning and well-intentioned tree huggers, environmentalists trying to protect the planet, and few people actually have an objection to that. The problem is that they've become so totally irresponsible about it that they're advocating for environmental causes, which the big message out of this election is that, yes, people do care about environmental causes, but not when it's costing them their money or costing them their jobs. And that's a huge standout from this election result. And then we have some other fringe parties of no real consequence. The backstory is that Labor Party has been ahead of the polls for the past 33 months, and the Liberal National Coalition, which is a coalition, historically it's been this way for many, many decades, of the Liberal Party, which is supposedly the Free Enterprise Party, and the Nationals is the upgraded name for the old, used to be called the Country Party. It's the Farmers' Party. It's the party for the man on the land. And they're very interested in things like infrastructure for the country, or for the bush, as we call it here. The wide plains and prairies in America and Australia. Anything that's not the city is the bush. So that's what they're representing. And the Liberal Party, I'll just shorthand that and said I don't have to keep saying National Liberal Party Coalition all the time. The Libs, and it's the not Liberals, they're the Conservative, remember. But the Liberal Party's been in turmoil for the last 6 years. They've had 3 prime ministers. We follow the Westminster system, so the elected parliamentarians then choose their own leader, who's called the Prime Minister. And so it's no equivalent to your president, because he doesn't stand for that office, that office or the appointment of the Prime Minister, who's essentially the leader of the country. is that gift is in the gift of the parliamentary party. So the parliamentarians vote and have their own choices to leader. And the largest party in Parliament, of course, which is the government, becomes the government. Their leader is called Prime Minister. And the Liberal Party's had 3 Prime Ministers in the last 6 years. It's been a total shambles. The first one was Tony Abbott, who's a very good bloke. He's an arch-conservative. He did a wonderful job of getting rid of the Labour Party, which was damaging this country so much. But then he tried to do what he promised to do, and that's get the budget back into order after the Labour Party is pretty rapacious on the budgets, national budgets. It left tons of debt and all sorts of problems. And he campaigned on, being responsible government, fixing it up. But as soon as he actually tried to do that, which involved putting up taxes on petrol and asking for a levy on our, essentially free medical system, the party turned against him. And eventually they got rid of him, and they elected a gentleman called Malcolm Turnbull as the Prime Minister. And Malcolm has been his last position, of course. He was executive chairman of Goldman Sachs Australia, so you probably don't need to know a lot more than that, except to say that he was a lefty himself. Prior to becoming a Liberal Party parliamentarian, he'd actually approached the Labour Party and asked to be given a safe seat, as they call it, a safe electorate. That was refused by the Labour Party, who had more brains than the Libs. But his problem is he was really a Liberal in drag. He was in the wrong party. He should have been the Labour Party, but he got to be Prime Minister, leader of the Liberal Party, and really ignited a civil war within the party between the left-wing liberals, small L liberals, left-wing people interested in socialism and identity politics and all that sort of stuff, particularly global warming and climate change, so-called. I see The Guardian last week's come out. Now, you're not supposed to say climate change, you've got to say climate emergency. So make it sound a bit more dramatic. They, of course, are the hub of the socialists and left-wingers. So that was the problem. And then only 8 months ago, the party was in complete disarray with infighting between its own left-wing liberals and its more right-wing conservatives. Only 8 months ago, the party finally realised that they'd had 33 consecutive news polls. That's the main polling corporation here. And for the last 33 months, they'd been behind Labour, so they couldn't possibly win an election. So they eventually got rid of Turnbull, a complete cancer in the party. He left most ungraciously and got in a plane and an immensely wealthy man. He's knowingly called Mr. Harbourside Mansion. He has such a beautiful big house on Sydney Harbour that him and his wife didn't even want to move into the official government house in Sydney, Kirribilli House. Their house across the other side of the harbour was better than the official government residence. So he took off to New York sulking, and then was pot-shotting the Liberal Party from New York with his son, who's a hedge fund guy in Singapore, funding, supporting various left-wingers inside the Liberal Party. Just absolute chaos. So only 8 months ago, the party came to its senses and got rid of him and brought in Scott Morrison, sometimes called the ad man. He's famous for the Australian "Where the hell are you?" ad with Laura Worthington, her name is now. Pretty racy sort of an ad, very successful. Anyway, Scott Morrison came in as Prime Minister, and I think the total view was, well, he's a safe pair of hands. He'd been immigration manager. He actually is the guy who stopped the boats. We had a terrible problem with illegal immigrants in Australia under the previous Labor government. They were so lax on security and illegal migrants that these boats were coming in from Indonesia and Ceylon, and they were absolute wrecks of things. Just the boat smugglers, people were paying them large amounts of money to be smuggled into Australia, and it was typically a very old boat, not well maintained, only designed to go one way, and people were getting killed. Over 1,000 people drowned in these various illegal enterprises, and the Labor Party is quite happy with that. They're socialists in favour of open borders, uncontrolled, unchecked immigration. Why we'd need more, I don't know. Australia has the highest immigration per capita in the world, but at least it is controlled, because Morrison essentially was the minister who stopped the boats. So he became the new Prime Minister 8 months ago, and that was the thought was, look, he's a safe pair of hands. He'll just keep the shop together until the elections, when the Liberals are going to get kicked out. Absolute disarray. And all the opinion polls, like Trump, nobody except perhaps Scott Morrison actually believed he could do it. And he did. When the results started coming in, it was sort of a replay of the Trump-type election, that people were surprised, amazed, and when, the swing to Labor that was predicted by everyone. Remember, all the pundits, politicos, the vast majority of them are very left-wing. They're socialists. They all support Labor. There are some, a few, not many. It's sort of the equivalent of the Fox News resistance, if you like, who support the Liberal Party more. So it was one of those elections. It was hard to believe that there was actually a swing towards the government. And, excuse me, Scott Morrison got up at the when the announcements came through that the government had held office at one government. He got up and he said, "I believe in miracles," which is pretty well what it was. So he's being christened as the Messiah from the Shire. Shire's not an expression that'll be well known to you folks in the States, but it's just equivalent of a county, if you like, an area that has a name as a grouping, a geographic area, equivalent of a county. We call it. I don't think we use the word Shire much, but that's what it means. So we have the Messiah from the Shire is back in. So it was pretty amazing. And leading up to this election, of course, as part of the turmoil in the government, we had these massive resignations by the leaders and key players because they were all convinced that the election was lost. And, of course, they all get very, very fat, very, very valuable retirement packages, quite extraordinary. And the people who've been in government for a long time, their retirement packages actually are quite obscene because the government, being the government, votes themselves far more generous terms than even the biggest of the private enterprise companies would offer. And one of them, Julie Bishop, has my particular disdain. She's been deputy leader of the Liberal Party for many, many years, through at least the last 3-4 governments that it's formed. And as deputy leader, she got a choice of her portfolio, and most of them want foreign affairs. It means you get lots of nice first-class travel, lots of parties, lots of cocktail parties, interesting things to do and go to, and not much work in my view. I think the public servants do all the work, but she stood for, at the time Turnbull got ejected by the party, she stood for election as to be the Prime Minister, and she only got 11 votes. So she was miffed about that and became entirely petulant and resigned and started courting the Labour Party. I mean, traitors. I guess that's not uncommon in politics, but she was angling for a job as the Australian ambassador to the United Nations to be appointed by the incoming Labour Party if they were successful. Chris Pine, the leader of the House, he's sort of the number 2 guy in the government. Chris Pine resigned, and so did many others. Here's Hank down the Hunter Valley. Gentleman and Turnbull just don't go in the same sentence. Quite right, Hank. And your electorate of the Hunter had about a 20% swing against Labor down there, even though it's held by Hunters, held by a Labor politician. So Julie went so far as to go courting Channel 9, which is the CNN or the MSN, if you like, of politics. It's owned by a merger with the Fairfax Group. They're all socialists, left-wingers. And she was courting them and volunteered to go on their show, their election night show, with a panel of lefties, and to gloat over the number of her ex-colleagues whom she'd been representing and working with for 25 years or so. And she was happy to go over there and gloat over the fact that they were going to be dismissed according to the popular view. And she even came up with a thing called the Bish Boop. Her claim to fame is getting a picture in the paper wearing very fancy clothes, you know, she's sort of effectively a clothes horse, Chanel clothes and Gucci shoes and what have you, and famous for some bright red shoes that the media got excited about, much loved by the media, being a lefty themselves. Of course, they get attached to these sort of people. And I'll show you a picture of it. They came up with this big picture of one of Julie's red shoes blown right up on the Channel 9 television presentation of the election results, and it was programmed to kick out all the beaten contenders, thinking it was going to be a bloodbath for her old colleagues. Absolute traitorous. Anyway, let's move on. I hope you're getting these pieces all put together. So last week we went through our triennial ritual. Excuse me, I have hay fever. Those of you who follow these things know that I've given up smoking. So it's not a smoker's cough anymore, but I do get a bit of hay fever. It's the morning down here. But power to the winners is much deeper than most of you imagine. Politics is basically a trading game. You give me this and I'll give you that. The political appointments and positions in the gift of government far exceed your expectations. There are 1,192 federal government entities in Australia consuming cash, all of whom, the vast majority of whom have boards, appointed boards, people representing the government. And as you know, the president in the US has the right to appoint a staggering number of people. I was going to say 8,000. That sounds too big to me. But I know that there's a staggering number of people that he has the power to appoint, all to well-paying, cushy jobs paid for by the taxpayer. And we have the same thing here, and that's real power. Of course, it's never really kept in check. So petulance, that's the province of the disappointed and disaffected. It's a real feature of everyday life. Occasionally in politics, it's just sad to see these people. This Julie Bishop in particular, another Julia Banks was another woman who got very nose out of joint and had been a member of the Liberal Party, had terrific help getting a seat, and resigned in sympathy with Turnbull, and was vicious towards the Liberal Party. In fact, stood against it in another electorate. All of this is the market spirits that generate the drive and the enthusiasm of people in the market. You've only got to think about what the S&P has done since Trump was elected. You might remember the US election night when the announcement came out that Trump had got it, and the market dived down like a mad thing, and the lefties were saying, "I told you so." Then it turned around and reversed, and it's been roaring up on its steepest trajectory ever, really. Since after the election. Absolutely fabulous. So this is Mr. Malcolm Turnbull, the petulant Liberal, ex-Goldman Sachs Australia Executive Chairman. Went to the, before he started his political career, he went to the Labor Party and asked to represent them. They had some brains and said no. And he's a real small L Liberal, pro-climate change, pro-big immigration, divisive, and created the split in the Liberal Party between Conservatives and Liberals who call themselves moderates, and loved by the media. Just a fellow traveller, one of the lefties. So thank goodness he's gone, but the damage he's done could have been incalculable, because the things that Labor was standing for, some of which incidentally are quite sensible, even though I have to declare I've been a lifelong member of the Liberal Party, donate to them and support them. Very involved with them many years ago, not so much now. But all of politics is basically about human nature and human emotions. And what we see and learn from politics is a guide to group behaviour elsewhere in the world. Now, you folks in the US have got an election coming up in 18 months, or nearly 2 years, 19, no, it's about 16 months now, isn't it? November 2020. How you stand it, I don't know. We had a 5-week election campaign, and everyone was thoroughly and utterly sick of hearing about politics. You have election campaigns that, as far as I can gather, never end, or they have a brief hiatus and then they start again. But that's important. And so these global groupings of trade and defence, vital international links, and spare a thought for Australia in the middle of this US-China trade war spat. And it's a bit more than that, because Australia is very much involved in the 9-dash line, which I've talked to you about before, which is China's efforts to claim the whole of the Yellow Sea as their territorial waters. And they've built and militarized these shoals, the Parcel Group and the Spratlys, which are really in international waters. That's been decided by the International Court. They just ignore that. But this happened during Obama's presidency. He just allowed the Chinese to do whatever they want to do. Although, it's pretty serious to say, well, how are we going to stop them? And what's happening now, of course, is that America and Britain and Australia run what they call rights of navigation exercise. They're steaming warships through these areas, sometimes within the 12-mile radius of the particular island that China claims. But China is Australia's biggest trading partner. Australia is a resource-rich country. Its main business is iron ore and coal, and of course all primary industry goods, cattle, grains, wheat, cotton, you name it, we grow it here. But the vast majority of that stuff goes to China, a huge percentage. But we have a military alliance with the US, so things are going to get worse for Australia, with China getting more and more aggressive about its rights. And in fact, China's currently a bit displeased with Australia for something that one of the foreign ministry people said. And what they've done is they've just said, well, we're not going to process the paperwork for the coal import. So there are many, many ships full of coal swinging off the anchor off various Chinese ports full of Australian coal, which they bought, but they're not allowing it to be delivered. So they're a giant, and when giants swipe, all the small fry get whacked. And this issue of global groupings of trade and defence are things that are going to become more and more important as this trade war heats up. And don't forget that Japan's entry into World War II was caused by a trade war. These things can get very serious. Not suggesting we're at that stage, but they are much more serious than just talking points. So let's move on. And here we are. I'm showing you some pictures here. The guy on the right is Scott Morrison. He's pretty much, you get what he looks like. He is what he looks like. He's a family man, got a couple of young daughters, lives in suburbia, the southern suburb of Sydney, beach suburb, nice. And he's an all-round good bloke. The guy on the, and he's been in business for a while. The guy on the left is Bill Shorten, who's the leader of the Labor Party, now defeated, was on track to become our new Prime Minister. Thank goodness he's not. And the lady with him is the lovely Chloe, his new wife. She's, well, not so a few years now, but she's not the original model. She's the upgraded spec, as you can see. She's a very attractive lady, very nice, lovely person. And right from the mould of Labor Party dynasty, her mother was Australia's last previous Governor-General. So that was them. In fact, they thought that the Labor were a parrot chick. The strategists thought Chloe was so nice that they had Bill running around. He's a scrawny and attractive-looking individual, I must say, but they had him out in his morning run, which seems to be obligatory for all politicians to show how, they're trying to be healthy. He was out for his morning run wearing a T-shirt saying, vote for Bill, Chloe Shorten's husband. I mean, really? I found that hilarious. Okay, so here basically are the socialists, the players, I should say, rather, the Labor Party. I've listed them on the left. They're socialists. They're big taxing. They're bigger spending. They've left the country absolutely broke the last couple of times they've been in government. They're nutters. Totally tribal. Creatures of the trade unions. Really interesting thing. Australia historically was very, very heavily unionised. About 65-70% of the workforce were unionised, and that's died. It's now down to 14%. And you wouldn't think with just 14% of the workforce unionised, the trade unions would be of any great import, but they are. They have massive financial resources, not only from the fees they get from their members and from their standover tactics that they use with employers, but they've managed to get themselves in as managers of Australia's superannuation fund. We have a situation here where the government's been it started as Labor Party policy back in the Keating era, trying to wean people off the pension, which is massively expensive, the old age pension, and massively inadequate as well, I might say. But they started a situation where you had compulsory superannuation, which meant that 9% of your wages were held back by your employer and paid to your superannuation fund, which was managed by another entity. And then the employer was required by law to match your contribution. So 9% of your money went into a managed fund, if you like, and that was 9% was also added by the employer. If you happen to be a public servant, federal public servant, the government's contribution as your employer is 14.5%. Absolutely scandalous. The rates of how good the employment perks are for public servants. But you wouldn't think the trade unions are terribly significant, but they are. They're hugely significant. And of course, the Labor Party is the creature of the trade unions, and it's affiliated with the trade unions. The trade unions contribute a lot of money to its campaigns. They campaign alongside Labor, and they have their own policies. And one of the big issues that turned up in this election. It's one of the untrue, unfair things that happen in elections. Is that there was a rumour started, became very, very dominant, that the Labour Party had an inheritance tax, a death tax, which we used to have in this country, was abolished 30 years ago. And that became a huge talking point. Well, in fact, the Labour Party didn't have that as one of their policies, but the trade unions, the peak body, did. They had as part of their policy they were working towards was an inheritance tax, a death tax. So Labour's response to this is the disingenuity you get from politicians, was no, we never had a death tax, but they didn't say sotto voce, yes, the trade unions do have it, and the trade unions have a massive influence over Labour Party policy. So, I mean, something they want to do in the future. Other things you can say about it is their huge issue was coal. And Labour, the lefties, the liberals, small L liberals, are anti-coal. They're all madly in favour of renewables, which, you know, is great. We have a lot of them. We've got these awful wind farms everywhere. We have solar panels because Australia gets massive amounts of sun. But the problem is that they don't create electricity at night, and they don't create electricity when the wind's not blowing. So you do need what's called dispatchable power, the ability to turn on power and generate electricity when the wind's not blowing or when the sun's not shining. And the only efficient large-scale technology for that is either coal or nuclear energy. And although Australia's a massive exporter of uranium, cop this for some Jules values, we have a lot of uranium in this country. We mine it, we export it, but nuclear energy is banned. We don't have any nuclear power stations, which is the most efficient way of providing energy. It's one of those weird things. And you have a look at the other side of the players, the Liberal National Party. They're conservative. They're pro-big business. They're supposed to be pro-small business, but they're real, Hank will tell you, their real support is for big business. And they support individual freedoms and choices. They support the social and medical safety net. We have universal health care in Australia, very, very good, totally free. Not really, I mean, you pay for it in your taxes, but it appears to be free. And very, very high standards of hospitals and medical care. If you ever get seriously sick, pray that you're in Australia. And theoretically, they support smaller government and lower taxation, but that's not true. They may philosophically support it, but the government just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and the level of government funding is, it's pretty well doubled in the last 8 years in this country, much as it has in the States. So what were these issues? Well, taxation was the biggest one. Labor campaigned on raising massive levels of tax, essentially by closing loopholes and also by raising tax rates. Now, I don't want to bore you with this, but the three major loopholes, the first one is what's called negative gearing. And what that does, it allows people to buy. In Australia, I should tell you, unlike the States, interest on your home loan is not a tax deduction. You get no help for that at all. You don't. There's no deduction for housing taxes, for state taxes, for council taxes, for water rates in many parts of the country. There's no tax benefit from that. However, if you buy an investment home that is a second home or a home that's designed to create income, you are then able to do what's called negative gearing. And what that means is that essentially it means that the cost of your investment home, the interest, the maintenance, the repairs, everything else, the cost, you can offset if that gets you into a negative situation, which normally it does. And if you borrow enough money, you can almost be sure it will. But you can offset that as a tax loss against your personal income. So that's part one of what they call negative gearing. And the cost to the government of that, the cost of taxation foregone, or the cost of taxation sheltered by the negative gearing, is $4.5 billion a year. Now remember, Australia is a country of 24 million people, so you're talking about a massive amount of money for a very small part of the population. And of course, like all tax lurks, once it's there, they've gone into it. Everyone's got into it, left, right, and centre. Plenty of people have 4, 5, 6 investment homes negatively geared. If you have big taxable income with very high rates of tax, highest rates of tax in the OECD, we are essentially, in this country, you'll get to 50% tax at 180,000. It's 48% tax and 2% levy for Medicare. Very highly taxed by OECD rates, but so many people have got into it. It's a huge deal. In fact, the cost of negative gearing and the capital gains tax which goes with it, it is eventually going to be more than the total cost of the pension, which all these initiatives were to try and limit people the payout of the old age pension. So with negative gearing, I'll keep this brief for you, we had a capital gains tax concession. So when you sold normally everything except the family house is subject to capital gains tax, and it's levied at whatever your marginal income tax rate is. And generally, with your negative geared investment house, instead of being taxable on the profits when you go to sell it, you got a concession of 50%. So you were only taxed on 50% of that profit. The rest was a gift from the government. But you dare not say it. The last leg of that was a 30% minimum tax on discretionary trust distribution. Well, what that is, it means if you've got a family and you can afford an accountant and a little bit of brain power, you can set up a discretionary trust whereby the trust earns the income and you can distribute it between your family members, and therefore everyone gets on a lower level of tax, or in some cases no tax at all. They're below the $18,400 threshold. So if you think about these three issues really logically, what Labor was saying is basically correct. Negative gearing is really a gift the government designed to make it more profitable and therefore more attractive for people to buy housing. But the argument is that the nation needs a large stock of housing as a rental housing for people who can't afford to buy a house. So let's encourage people to buy a house and buy another house and another house, and we'll give them these incentives. Part of that, of course, was the capital gains tax. When you went to sell this tax-protected asset, you only would be liable for tax on 50% of it. And Bill Shorten, the leader of the Labor Party who was campaigning to win the election, said it's a gift from the government, and it is. It is. And in the same way, the Labor was going to slap a 30% minimum tax on discretionary trust distributions. Because why? Well, it's a gift from the government. I mean, discretionary trusts are so easy to set up that people like me have discretionary trusts. You can share your income with your wife and your children. And by spreading your income over a number of people, and you can have more, you can invite in other people can come into the trust, other relatives and family can come in the trust. You drop down the rate, you get down to a lower and lower rate of income. But What about the poor working man? What he does, he doesn't have a chance for discretionary income. When he's employed, um, he's a PAYE taxpayer, a pay-as-you-earn taxpayer. And every week when he gets his payroll check, bang, the employer has been required by law to deduct the estimated tax from that and send it straight to the tax department. So the working man in any job, this applies from menial labour all the way up the scales from very highly qualified people. They don't have this opportunity to organise their tax affairs in an efficient way. So what Shorten said, and he's right to say it, is these things are a gift from the government. And there was an uproar, and this was a huge issue. One of the two main issues in this election, because when people have a benefit and they've had it for some length of time, it stops being a benefit and they start to think of it as a right. So with this, the one I've excuse me, not put in here because I didn't want to send you into total stupor, was what's called the franking credits. And franking credits is very simply an advice the government brought in. If you buy Australian shares that pay dividends, in Australia the emphasis is, unlike the US, the main emphasis is on dividends. How much does this company pay out? And, big stable companies like telcos and banks and what have you, they have a pretty realistic and guaranteed, virtually guaranteed income, a dividend stream that they pay out. You've got a pretty good idea what they're going to pay out. And the company, of course, has to pay tax before it can distribute its dividends. So the government brought in a scheme called franking credits, which basically said if the company's paid tax on these income from these shares, then you'll get the benefit of the franking credits, and you can apply them to that bit of income or any other income you like. Which was a big benefit designed to support the Australian share market, essentially. All these things that come from government have a purpose for them. It sometimes doesn't work the way it was designed, but this worked terribly well. And it worked so well, in fact, that everybody who possibly could who was in retirement had their big investments in Australian shares getting these franking credits. Well, then it turned out that a lot of these people in retirement didn't have enough other income to take advantage of the franking credit, or the reality is that the vast majority of them structured their affairs so they were only invested in shares that had big dividend flows with the benefit of franking credits. And then when they didn't have enough other income, the government turned around and said, if you don't have the income, we'll pay it to you in cash. Almost literally, you'll get a check for massive amounts of money, being the tax. If you don't have any income and you don't pay any tax, right, you shouldn't be getting refunds for income that's already been taxed once. Why should you then get the benefit of cash? So these things, the Labor Party argued them not very well, but in my view, it wouldn't have mattered what they said or how persuasive the argument was. Once people have had an opportunity to structure their affairs and see these benefits, which then become a way of life, it's impossible to take them away. They don't see the logic of that. It's true that these are the gift to government, so it's not that you're losing anything, it's just that government stopped giving you the gift. The reality is the average punter says, you're kidding. That's money that I've relied on, that's money that I'm entitled to get under the existing law, and I've organised my affairs under the existing law. Why should I be penalised? And what we found in this election is that although people care about equity and they also care generally about climate change, the average Australian, and I'm sure the average American, says, I'd like to keep the world a nice place. I'd like to keep our Earth as pleasant and beautiful and lovely as it is. But, and here's the big but, if it affects my standard of living, or it affects my work or my income, forget it. it ranks a very, very poor second. And that's the human nature that's so obvious. And, you've got an election in the States coming up next year. And I think you're going to see a lot of these things. The other interesting thing, the point I've tacked on the bottom, is Bill's 8-minute electric car. In the middle, I don't have, Shorten even drives a car, I suppose he does. Every Australian I know drives a car. But whoever his campaign managers were, propped him up with a nice, shiny, bright red Tesla with a PowerPoint stuck in its backside. And here was Bill saying, climate change, this is part of the saviour of climate change. Look at this beautiful electric car. And you can recharge it in 8 minutes, which takes overnight to recharge the thing. He knew nothing about it. And interesting enough, there's very, very little interest in electric vehicles in Australia. I've only seen one Tesla in the Gold Coast, which is the sixth biggest city in Australia. And Australia is a big country, and people drive big distances. But it hasn't taken off here. No doubt it will, but it hasn't now. There was a stupidity of a campaign stunt. So I've discussed most of these matters with you, that the relationship between the Labor Party and the unions, and the super or superannuation gravy train. I've talked to you about the death tax rumours. And the real petulance coming from disaffected Liberals, Julie Bishop and a couple of her mates. And the next issue down here is the Adani mine. And this is an extraordinary story. This is about a potentially huge mine. It's a coking coal mine up in central North Queensland. And it's potentially huge. It's owned by the Adani Group, which is an Indian company, and they've been 8 years trying to get approval for this mine. And Adani Group owns coal transport hubs, owns the Abbott Point coal distribution here in Australia, and power stations, huge power stations in India, and their big push is this fairly low grade coking coal. Would be exported to India, and a massive effort there to try and get people access to electricity. Vast number of Indians are so handicapped by poverty. They don't have electricity, they don't have running water, they don't have light, they don't have power. And Adani was trying to get this massive project off the ground to export all of the production of the Adani mine. But the Labor government, we have state governments as well as federal governments here. We're cursed with politicians. The state government, being Labor, has just said we don't like it, we're not having it. And for the last 8 years, they've put every objection possible, including really, really seriously stupid stuff like, after 6 years, they discovered that part of where the mine's going to go is the territory of the black-throated finch, which is a small bird that is in danger of extinction. So the mine can't possibly go on. Well, nobody knows what's the territory of the black-throated finch or how many of them there are. So the latest thing from the Environmental Department of the Queensland government, which is totally run by Labor people and socialists, that's how they get the jobs, is they want Adani to give an estimate of how many of these finches there are and where their habitat is. I mean, that sort of thing would take 5 years. But the big issue for Australia, North Queensland, has got well above average unemployment. And the mine means jobs, big jobs, lots of jobs, thousands of jobs. There's a new railway to be built from the mine to the coast, to Abbott Point Terminal. There's a railway job, there's maintenance job, there's mining jobs, there's startup jobs, there's probably 1,000 people doing paperwork at their Townsville office. So these people in an area of very high unemployment, this is a wonderful source of employment, and it's employment not only for skilled people, but also for people with relatively limited parts of skill. And this is a vital issue, and the Queensland government, the state government, has been blocking it. And the federal government has been having it bob both ways, as we say, to their inner city type Greens, the people who are absolutely nuts on climate change. They've been saying, well, we haven't approved the mine. And to the people in Queensland, which is where the mine is, that's the deep north, if you like, equivalent to what happens in America. They're saying, well, it's just going through the process. In other words, they're telling a direct lie. Their policy was to block this, but they didn't want to come straight out and say it. But the population was smart enough, or as Graham Richardson says, the mob will always work it out. And the mob worked out that Labor was blocking this mine. And they were savage about it. Because these are people, like most of us, they're not interested in theoretical discussions about climate change or the benefit of the latest electric car or any of those sort of social issues. What their interests are, putting bread and butter on the table, feeding their family, clothing their family, looking after their family. These are far more primitive motives and more essential motives than what the inner city latte swillers think about it all. And then just to highlight that, the leader of the Greens party in Australia, a chap called Bob Brown, decided he wanted to highlight this issue, and he set up a convoy of private cars driving from the south of Australia in Melbourne all the way up to the Adani mine and these northern Queensland, central Queensland areas where coal mining is such a big deal, and saying, as we've heard the Deputy Premier of the state say, oh, well, you better all get re-skilled because mining's dead. Well, you can't tell that to a man whose next meal comes from having a job, which is not available elsewhere. So the Adani mine and the Greens convoy to highlight it became an absolute own goal. That just highlighted the issue that was screaming its head off already. Give you an idea what I'm talking about. This is Australia. This is a country about the same size as the continental United States. It's pretty large. But the population is mainly scattered around the coast because a large part of the centre of Australia is actually a desert, the Great Australian Desert. But here are the states, so you can see the difference. New South Wales is the largest state. Started off life as a penal colony. It was discovered by Captain Cook, and the Poms thought it'd be a good place to have a penal colony, so they shipped people out here to go into an open jail, if you like, and it's grown from there. Victoria is the state right down in the south, and the big states of Victoria, New South Wales, and Queensland. Queensland's absolutely huge, as you can see, and runs all the way up from pretty much where I am, near the border, right up into the Timor Sea. Massive state, full of minerals, full of agriculture, all the good things. West Australia is a mining state. That's where almost all of the iron ore is coming out of, is West Australia. South Australia is a nice place. Northern Territory's pretty active up around the far north coast there. But in Tasmania, the Apple Isle, we call it. It's a very pretty little island, well, quite a big island down underneath Australia. But those are those sort of territorial differences. And honestly, they are different. Victorians think everyone in Queensland's a redneck, and I think Bill Shorten called them knuckle draggers. I mean, really, how to be popular and influence friends, eh? But there you are. So I hope you found that. This is the Liberal petulance. This is what they call the Bish boot. This is supposed to be, this is the idiots at Channel 9 on election night sitting there. And they came up with this representation of one of Julie Bishop's so-called famous red shoes, and it swings and it will kick out anyone who loses their seat. The idea being that the overwhelming opinion was that very many of the Liberal Party guys were going to lose their seat, and Julie Bishop would gloat over that and count down and press the button to make this thing give a big kick. They thought that would be really funny. Well, it's not bloody funny at all. And these were the people that Julie Bishop had worked with, and she'd been paid by the taxpayers to work for this party, paid handsomely, I should say, far too much. Total freighter. Anyway, let's move on. And this is what happened. Here's the psychology. You got a great big bar, the biggest bar on the chart, and that actually took the Australian All Ordinaries Index, it's called the SPY 200, equivalent to the American S&P, I guess, with Australian companies. That took it to a new 11-year high. And there was massive euphoria, etc. But look, it didn't last, did it? Of course, Australia follows the US pretty slavishly, so a couple of small down days in the States really knocked the tail out of that. Anyway, if you're not happy today, you should be. We've had another massive week in success. This is the crude oil chart. You can see we've been on a big sell, a lot of money in that, at $5,500, I think, per one contract just for 2 days. Let's see if that's right. I don't want to accidentally tell you something wrong. Yeah, $4,800 one day, 2 days, one contract. Pretty nice, isn't it? You're welcome to go to the website, Daniel Code website, and have a look at these results from Success. They're pretty extraordinary. And of course, a lot of these trades were also TO3 and TO3 plus trades. This is the S&P for today. It's been we've been short that for a few days, couple of days down. Here's COMEX Gold. We had the buy signal for today. Look at it. What a beauty. The gold bugs will be jumping up and down. I don't know where they are now. Where's our mate? Let's see. Stand by. Where's the gold bugs? We have a lot here. We have a lot of gold bugs. Just having a look if my particular friend from Reading is here with us. I don't think so. He'll no doubt look at this later. Anyway, the gold bugs are happy. We're happy. Lots of money. Thank you very much. Great business that. This was heating oil. This is a Success product that we're marketing. It's down over $5,000 per one contract in 4 days. Pretty extraordinary. Here's the NASDAQ. We've been short that. We started covering the NASDAQ in Success. Now we added the NASDAQ and Palladium and the Russell to the Success coverage. Now I know that the Russell's correlated with S&P and NASDAQ, but it's a better option at the moment because it has a considerably smaller margin. And here it is. Here we had a sell and a little buy that went nowhere, then back on the sell, and we got a decent reward for that today. So that's the Success program for the last couple of days, folks. Here's T-bonds. We had a terrific run there. We had the big run up all the way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 days straight up. 3 days down. Got that. Got the buy. Got the sell. Got the buy yesterday. And today, of course, whooshy. Look at it. Great trading. Do go and have a look at that. You have a free trial. Most clients have had free trial. I've been running it since August. So most of you have seen it, but if you're new to the Daniel Code or new to Success, please just go to the website www.thedanielcode.com. Click the free trial link. You'll get a 14-day free trial of everything at the website, including Success. You can get right into it. This is a endorsement from my friend Mickey D, like I've known for a long time, wonderful people, know his family well, who's done a Daniel Code trading tutorial, and obviously thrilled with it, as says Sue, who's done a Daniel Code trading tutorial. She told me first time she'd been trading for 15 or 18, 20 years. She said the first time she's ever made regular money all the time since she did the Daniel Code trading tutorial. So we've got some happy people who are with us, and good to have them here. And you can do it too, folks. And if you think the success is good, which it is, it's outstanding. The reality is that if you do a Daniel Code trading tutorial, learn to trade yourself, you'll make about 20 to 28% more than the success makes. And there's a very simple reason for that. There's a couple of tools that I teach you when you do the Daniel Code trading tutorial that we can't use with the success program, because that's a computer-driven program. And there are a couple of these tools that just can't be programmed, which is great because it protects it for the people who have got the trouble and expense of doing a tutorial and learning to trade properly. And if you are interested, and I have availability right now, it's quietened down a bit this month, so we could take you as soon as you like. If you're interested, want to be a super trader, join the elite, email me, jneedham@thedanielcode.com. Let me know where you live so I can work out the time zone and call you, and we can have a discussion about your trading, what I can do to help, and talk particular about a Daniel Code video tutorial, which would be grand. We need more people to do that. If you haven't already had a free trial, folks, you're welcome. Everything the Daniel Code, you can have a 14-day free trial. Just go to the website, hit the register button, follow the prompts. Any problems, Terry at support@thedanielcode.com is there to help you. And I am a partner with Trade Navigator, Jensen Trade Navigator, have been for many years. Use their software exclusively, and we can arrange a free trial for you of the Trade Navigator trading software as well, and help you get set up for your trading. This is our compliance statement. I always have to tell you this, and it's real. If you don't know how to trade, you're going to lose money quickly, and a lot of it. So I really beg you, learn how to trade before you risk any real money. And that's us for today, I think, folks. Here we are. Yep, that's done. We're finished. Thank you very much. I know we've gone over time. Hey, Murph, good to talk to you, mate. I'm here anytime you tutorial guys want me. You know that. Just send an email. I'll get in touch with you. Great. Sue, thanks, Tweety. I hope everything's well with you. I hope you found that interesting. You probably did, I know, because you sent me that email about the rotten things they were going to do, aren't they? Honestly, it was scary. Yeah. Okay, well, bless you all, and thank you for being with me today. And do send me an email if you're interested in doing the Daniel Code tutorials. I'd be happy to oblige. Hank, good to see you. Akshay as well. Any updates on what? Akshay, not sure. I know you're interested in the US dollar index. It's pretty much range bound. Write me an email if you have anything in particular you'd like me to talk about, folks, and I'll prepare it for you. And thanks, John. Yes, I've been looking forward to the weekend. It's a glorious Friday afternoon of sunshine here. Not quite afternoon. It's 20 minutes to midday. It'll be midday soon enough. Look forward to seeing you next time, my friends. Shoot me an email if there's anything you'd like me to discuss. Any questions you have, jneedham@thedanielcode.com. Thanks for now. Bye-bye.